All right, we're going to get started. I'm just going to jump right in because there's a lot to go over. First, when I say beyond technical prowess, competence is not enough, what do I mean by competence? I define competence as being able to interact with inanimate things like software and hardware. You start college or boot camp or you're self-taught and you start learning how to write programs. You start learning how to interact with different tools and different tooling, and then you go to get a job, or you get a job and you're interviewing or something, and you realize, well, there's more tooling to learn, or there's more of this industry standard tooling, or just a company-specific tooling, or something like that. That's all very technical. You're basically following, you're interacting with an inanimate object. So that's what I'm going to define as like technical competence, is interacting with all those things, the languages, the tools we have to every day. Then, what is vision? Vision is knowing where you're going, knowing how you're going to get there, and this is the key point, other people have to be able to pick up on that. Humans are the only primates with whites in their eyes. Most primates have colored sclera, so you can't differentiate where they're looking necessarily. So humans are able to, other people can tell where someone's looking. And how that actually works out in real life is that people look where high status people are looking. You have someone with high status or good reputation, people are going to look at what they're looking at, and that's vision. Like, vision's not just knowing where you're going and how you're going to get there. If you don't also, or if you're not able to project that, it's really not vision, at least not in an organizational way. Consistent vision brings trust, and what I mean by this is that if you know where you're going and how you're going to get there, and people can see that, and you do the thing, and then you do it again. You know where you're going to go next and how you're going to get there, and you do the thing, that people in the organization start to trust you. One, because you know where you're going and it's the right place. You say how you're going to get there, and you get there that way. And once you have a record of delivering that kind of thing, people really do trust you in the organization. Now, sometimes people might not do all the things I talk about, but I can look at an engineer and know sometimes they have like a lot of indicators of vision. And when I talk with an engineer, and I'm like, oh, they probably have really good vision in there. Oftentimes, it's because they know the fire to run at. Knowing what fire to run at in an organization really kind of levels engineers, right? But it's hard. You can't practice picking the right fire. You can practice all the skills that help you pick the right fire. But knowing how to pick the right fire is very difficult. And knowing what fire to run at, if you already are able to do that, then you can blow your career wide open with this, because once you know what fire to run at, all you have to do is get everyone behind you. And if you don't know what fire to run at, then these skills will help you learn what fire to run at. I'm clicking through my slides at the wrong pace, so y'all are just going to have to deal. There are some social trade-offs to the things I'm about ready to talk about. And really it comes down to, oftentimes in engineering, we want to talk about engineering, line of code, this, that, the other thing, all things that don't involve people. But in reality, when you're on a team, what the team thinks about you matters, because all of this is sales. And if you're kind of holding on to, like, it's engineering, you can do that. But if you don't embrace the fact that a lot of our job is sales and negotiations, then you're missing a whole part of the industry, and you're not developing the kind of influence that you could have. Abraham Lincoln, basically said, it's better to stay quiet and not let anyone know you don't know what you're talking about. And I can see why this would be tempting, right? But in an org, when people do that, you kind of end up with an emperor has no clothes situation. The emperor had no clothes because people were afraid to say the obvious, because they were afraid they would look stupid. And so if you're kind of headed this way in the organization where you're trying to bide your time and not say anything because you don't want anyone to know that you don't know what you're talking about, well, newsflash, have you met everyone else in the industry? Anyway, okay. Personal career goals. I have some personal career goals, and, well, really it's just to be like butter, and that's my only goal. Because butter is really my favorite food. It goes with everything, and anything that I'm willing to eat tastes better with butter. And if someone's like, oh, if someone compared me to butter, that'd be quite a compliment. So, what is the programming equivalent of butter? It's clarity. To everything you touch. Whenever you enter a situation, you bring clarity with you, everyone wants you in every situation. That's just how it works, because things are confusing. And the people that can make the confusing clear are the people that are the most valuable. Which only makes you wonder, how do you bring clarity? Instead of being like, it's somewhat a mindset and a muscle. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And so you want to start developing this habit. And some of that habit is, clarity is making sure you have a burden of responsibility to provide the context that people need to engage with a problem. And if you're not providing the context that they need to engage with the problem, then you're not making the situation more clear for anyone. So we're going to go through some practical examples, and because I think these are super informative. So first, we have a new dev. You'll notice their picture is mustard, because mustard doesn't go like butter. Mustard doesn't go well with chocolate, doesn't go well with anything. It's just like hot dogs, maybe, hot hamburgers. Mustard enthusiasts don't come after me. So this is a perfectly fine message. We have a new developer, they've entered Slack, and they say, hey, I can't get my server started. This is a perfectly fine message if you're just starting out in the industry. You're a junior, I'm okay with this. But you should mature out of these statements, because this is really not giving people on your team enough to interact with you. Now, if I, as a developer, see this hit the Slack, and if the person's high leveled, already I'm like, oof, like they haven't started to debug yet. They're not asking the questions. They have given me no data. If I engage with this person, are they going to expect me to fix their problem completely? Is this even in a portion of the stack that I know? There are so many questions about this. There's just no information here. People are going to stand back from engaging with this because they really don't know what they're buying into. And I'm going to contrast that when I started at Dscout, and all of these slides that are about to follow are anonymized. I pulled out any information that could be problematic. But I'm like, I get this error message. Someone help me. Do you know how to do this? If not, I'm going to run forward. But here's my error message. This is much better. People now know what the problem that I'm hitting is. They may have seen this error before. I'm asking for help. I'm not trying to hide the fact that I may not be familiar with all the things. Here's another example. What I like about this example is that I give the current status. Like, what am I doing right now? Because this is like day 2 or 3. And what have I done? What happens when I run the setup script, which of course most people in your org are going to be familiar with your setup stuff. And then I have some test failures. I had to remove those. And then I also attached a text file of logging. So now, and it's kind of funny, when you onboard, that first impression you make with people, it makes a big impression. The fact that I documented everything on the way in, I'm already starting out from a position where I'm seen as competent because I understand the context to give people when I have a problem. Because I'm not asking them to tell me what my problem is. I'm telling them what my problem is, and they can help me find a solution, but they don't have to do all the debugging for me. Or like this, here's another one. I'm attempting to seed data, and I tell them what I've tried, I tell them the errors I'm getting, and then I throw out a theory. I will throw out theories, even if I know they're wrong, because people like to correct people, and you can get them to engage. So even if I throw out a theory that's wrong, if someone engages, boom, I know something. I know I'm wrong, and they might actually throw out another theory that's better than mine, but still wrong, but that's okay. We're headed the right direction. So when you approach giving context to your teammates like this, you get better at articulating problems. You get more comfortable with your shortcomings, because you're not going to be able to write these posts about what's not working for you and still make yourself look amazing. Like you're missing something, that's why you're in a state where you need help. And it gives opportunities for teammates to help. This is especially valuable when you start someplace and you're looking to make the collaboration and the relationships with people that you're going to need as you're working through major feature things. When people feel like they can engage with you and be helpful, people like to be needed. People like to be valuable, and you can help them be that. And more often than not, after I finish doing my write-up, and so like, and I'm like, ugh, I know what's wrong. I don't even have to post the message. That's the kicker. I don't even have to post the message because I went through the whole problem and my brain said, oh, yeah, of course, this is what it is. And I don't even have to push enter. And when you start doing that a lot, your brain starts solving your problems for you on the regular. And you get better at it over time. You get better at helping other people too, because now you have a rubric how you're organizing information and what would you need to know in order to tell someone your problem. So when you go to talk to someone else, you're trying to get that information out of them. And when you're able to, oftentimes you unblock them. And maybe that doesn't work. Maybe in reality you have documentation you wrote for yourself in your onboarding. Like I always keep an onboarding journal. So when David started in June and he had a problem, I just go back to my onboarding journal and see, like, what did I hit? How did that work for me? Because basically this is all a math problem. What you have your knowns and your unknowns, and you need to find the answer. It's always the same. In high school, I had a teacher named Miss Henry, and whenever she would read a word problem, she would immediately start writing down on the board, current, 4 miles per hour equals C. And then, boat, 7 miles an hour equals B. And at first, I'm like, I'm really lazy, and I didn't want to write that down. But then I started realizing I was good at math, but I was way better when I made my data bank at the top of my problems. And I've kind of just carried that through. Because when you have a really good inventory of what you know, sometimes figuring out what you don't know is much easier. And then you're just going to repeat that for all the things. So you're going to do it in Slack messages, like what we already saw. You're going to do it in design documents. Basically, any communication with your team, you're going to assume the burden of giving them the amount of context they need to engage with you. You're going to answer foundational questions. And so if you're thinking about writing a Slack message, what does that look like? Well, what problem are you fixing? What have you tried? What happened? Give them all the data. How are you going to fix it? Throw out a theory. This is how you get people to start engaging with you. And bigger topics require even more. So this is just onboarding. Onboarding, generally speaking, I'm hoping that people can get their environment set up. I get irritated if I can't set up in one day. But let's imagine it takes 2 or 3, okay? But this is like a relatively short project that everyone has context on that you can get a lot of help from. On bigger things, bigger topics require even more, like when you're going to pick up a feature. Maybe it's just a sprint that it's going to last. Maybe it's going to last a whole quarter or multiple quarters. Those kind of things require even more of this being responsible for the context and being responsible for the communication. Because having unchanging context is critical. If I get handed something today that I don't know, which happens a lot, I have a conversation. So if I talk with someone today, and then I talk with them again in a week after I've been researching this, the conversation is crazy different. Because in the last week, I learned a lot of stuff. And if you ask me what I'd learned and how I got there, I'm going to give you a bad version. Because I'm not going to remember all of those things. And the hard thing is it's very difficult for teammates to engage with you when they don't have full context. Because no one likes to engage with that person that always has the gotchas. Oh, but you don't know this. Oh, but you don't know this. Like, that's just miserable. You're just like, I don't want to lose any more fingers in that machine. You just walk away, right? So you want to make it so that having unchanging context is easy. And so documentation really helps with that. And you're not done when you finished any type of documentation. Now, you'll notice that I even talk about Slack messages as documentation, because I don't have a rigid, like, oh, it has to be a PRD. Like, it could be any kind of written communication to me is documentation, because it doesn't change over time, and I can find it later. And your job is done when everyone's on the same page. So finishing the doc is not the goal. Making sure everyone is on the same page. This does not just include engineers, your engineering manager and your designer, because the fact of the matter is that if you're going to really go up and take on more and more responsibility and leadership in an organization, you have to be able to communicate with your engineering managers or with your product managers or with your designers. It's about having the whole team headed the same direction. Many engineers are good at getting engineers to go a direction. They're not as great at getting non-engineers. Engineers are weird. So there's a people aspect to this as well, which is that oftentimes we think of the cone of uncertainty as like, we're going to build a feature, and we don't know what we're building. And then eventually we know what we're building. But the cone of uncertainty exists in every relationship between you and a coworker. So if I've got another developer on my team, I'm expecting things from them, and they're expecting things from me. And the weirdness comes in when neither one of us know what that is. Right? So you want to manage that cone of uncertainty, and documentation really helps, because you're saying, I'm going to do this. This is my integration point. Someone's going to have to pick it up on the other side. So it's a really good way of communicating. Oh, there's the cone of uncertainty. Also, there are some organizations that play the telephone game. Now, playing the telephone game in software is like a very expensive game. Because the telephone game, like, everyone gets together and talk, and it's a great idea, and everyone's talking about it, it's amazing. And everyone goes off to build the thing. And they build the thing, and none of it fits together. Because you can get in conversations, and you think everyone's saying the same thing. And they're nodding along, because there's no one really responsible to go talk to each person and give them a list of questions. Question 1, do you agree with this? Yes or no? Question 2, no one's doing that, right? So we're talking, it's like, sounds like everything's fine, and you don't get it till you get down to the nitty gritty. You're like, oh, you were expecting this to be a secure socket? Because we were just like UDPing the stuff, like, you end up someplace where people aren't sure how the integration points were supposed to be. This is probably my favorite thing to rant about, which is, on the people side of things, sometimes you have organizations or people in those orgs that can't talk about a problem without talking about the whole world. And the only thing I know when that happens is that to solve the problem, we're going to have to touch the whole world. Because if you can't narrow down the problem to one little piece of code, you're going to touch everything you talk about. And that's a lot of context for people to have to pick up. Thank you for this, David. I did the hot take. Development. If you're starting to code before you understand what you're doing, it's like pouring the foundation before drawing the house plans. Now, some of you want to fight me right now, and I'm okay with that. Because there's a difference between accidental architecture and exploration. If you don't know where you're going to start with documentation, doing exploration is key. But where I always see this going, I mean, when I say always, I mean like 98% of the time, people do the exploration and it works. Let's ship it. We're done. On to the next feature. And they have code in 100 files because that's what they needed to get it working. So I would call that accidental architecture. That's bad. Like, yes, if you don't know enough to start writing documentation, all means, get in the code, start exploring. But exploring is not the same thing as architecting. And if you just carry that exploration through and deliver it, that's just accidental architecture. And if you're one of these people that thinks about everything and you can't decouple your concepts, you're going to end up with a repo that's very big and highly coupled and very difficult to work in. Because if you can't make your problem small, you're going to have big problems. So, where do you start? There's a lot written on design docs, or dorks, depending, on design docs. And I would say there are two basic ones you'll see in the industry. The PRD is the first one, which is the problem requirement document, basically being able to write a problem statement. And then a request for comment, which is proposing a solution where people are going to weigh in on it. Now, these are somewhat formalized in many companies. And my talk isn't going to focus on how to formalize them or why they should be formalized or why you want the same templates or that kind of thing. I'm going to go kind of more to us, like, what skills can someone use anywhere, regardless of the organizational expectations, and make you look better. And I will tell you, especially in orgs where they don't already have this stuff formalized, you will look amazing when you do what I say. So it's going to be all about the basics. You're going to use written words, you're going to use ERD diagrams, flow charts. Now in this case, you're going to become familiar, hopefully, with Mermaid. And because pictures are worth 1,000 words. And sometimes you're just trying to communicate what you're wanting so everyone's on the same page. And also screenshots are extremely valuable. So in all of my docs, there are common sections. For example, there will be a background section or a problem section. These are all optional, right? Like I can put in whatever makes the most sense. Goals and non-goals. Sometimes it's super important to call out what you're not doing because you've been talking about something for a while and that product manager 3 removed from you is sure you're building this thing that he wants and you're not. And sometimes if you know that they have a misconception and you list the fact that you're actually not going to do that thing that they think that you're going to do right there, man, it flushes out those problems really early and when they were small. I often have a section for solution, known steps, remaining unknowns, product questions, eng questions. So product questions, oftentimes I'm just verifying that what I think product is wanting is what they're wanting. And engineering questions may have more to do with infrastructure or maybe how some other team has built something. And then also a resources section, and I link to anything in here that would be helpful. Maybe there's Slack conversations that happened or a PR review where things got heated, something like that. Because the goal is to have a doc that's so well written that when it's done, and the work can go to anyone. If you are the only person that can do the work, then you're making yourself your own blocker. Everyone, with this approach, everyone has the same plan. People can see what you expect from them and what you expect from yourself. And you have a decision history. Because nothing's worse than trying to explain a decision that you made with different data, with new data that makes that decision look stupid. You know, but when you're like, oh, yes, I made this decision because I thought this eventing system was asynchronous, but turns out this eventing system is synchronous. And then you think this can't happen, but it can, right? And so you have this record that I thought this eventing was actually asynchronous, but actually it was just a misnomer. It's not actually asynchronous, it's synchronous, and so that's why we made this decision. And it doesn't necessarily make it any better that you made the wrong decision, but at least you don't feel like you made it for no good reason at all. So, some tech deck walks into your stand-up. You are asked to unify academic clubs and sports teams. Now, I'm going to show you how I would go about solving this problem. Now, this is a relatively small one. On bigger problems, my documentation will look like more. But I wanted to walk through what this was like for me. Because the point isn't that the doc is always right. The point is that the doc ensures clarity and alignment. If I'm able to write down the problem and someone reads it and says, yep, that's the problem, great, I have clarity and I have alignment. Now, there are some trade-offs here. Like, by writing the docs, you could take longer. It's possible. I just haven't seen it happen. Everyone talks about, like, you start talking about docs, like, oh, you want waterfall. No, I don't want waterfall. You think we have to know everything before we start. No, didn't say that either. You want me to slow down. Well, actually, I'm going to be, lest I'm going to be wrong. I mean, someone's going to have some instance where I'm wrong, which is hard to imagine, I know. But usually, even if I stop and write the documentation and I do all this stuff, I am faster on the delivery. And when it delivers, it slides right out the pipeline because I already have my test plan. How can they make a test plan? They already know what I'm doing. So, like, everything, people will say, oh, you'll go faster if you don't write docs. I call something. But if you take that approach of not writing any documentation, you are doing a few things. You're creating silos. You're creating a lack of visibility. It's really hard to plan for testing. And it's harder to share the work because you can't break it down and show, like, I'm going to do this piece, you do this piece, and this is where we're meeting up. And everyone thinks that they're on the same page until they figure out that they aren't. So now what I'm going to do is try to switch my screen to go over a series of documents. OK. Go away. Here we go. OK. That's the wrong one. So basically, I write these docs. What's the matter? Oh, yes, I know what to do. Maybe I don't know what to do. I need to stop mirroring, I think. I need to mirror, and I'm trying to, like, of course, because that's... Well, that works, I guess, but I don't know. OK, you know what? We'll just make this work. OK. So I have this. This is the first doc that I wrote, and you can see that I like Notion because it will do an automatic table of contents. Oh, gosh, this is just horrible. Look at this thing right here. I just can't take it. Go away. OK. OK. Sorry, I'm like, just so you guys have already sat through a lot of technical difficulties. I don't want to make it worse. All right. So I use Notion. They have a table of contents thing, so that every time I drop a header in, you get this automatic table of contents at the top. You'll see that I have a background to the problem and some terminology, a solution, engineering questions, and product questions. So here, I define my problem, what I actually know. Now, when I start out, I really don't know that much. I know that they have academic clubs and sports teams, and that they're basically the same, they're used the same, and they're causing a little bit of pain points when we try to work around them. Terminology. I included this because every time I listen to my team talk, groups, clubs, and teams get switched up, and those because they're so close together. So I'm like, you know what? We're going to use big words here. We're going to use multiple word phrases each time to make sure that when we talk, it's very clear what we're talking about. And then the solution is to unify those academic clubs and sports teams as one concept. So I'm already calling out where I'm headed to. All I know at this point is that this is what the ERD looks like, and I kind of know that's lying because I know there are these bridge tables in there. And so then I start writing down all my brainstorming engineering questions. Like, there's two approaches here that I can clearly see. One of them is to just dump one table into the other and go that way, or the other one is to build up a whole separate system and then switch over at some point. Then I have clarifying questions like, right now, who uses this in the API? Is this in the UI? Do we have to have backwards compatibility? How long do we have to have backwards compatibility? These type of things. These are things that I don't know that I'm going to have to ask someone else for. And then I have product questions. Do we think this is going to change? Like, are we expecting new features to drop? And also, this is a big one, is product thinking about these entities the same way we are? Do they think about them the exact same way, like sports teams, the same way they think about academic clubs? Because it's possible that the tech debt that made a lot of sense a year and a half ago no longer makes sense. So then we have the second version. Now, in this doc, you'll see I've highlighted some sections where there are changes. In the ERD, the first thing I'm going to call out is that there's this faculty. I found out there was a faculty table, and it matters. And then in the engineering questions, we found out that we wanted to just create the new table. We didn't want to dump one into the other. And the reason for that was because we wanted to have as much UX stability as possible until we made this switch over. And we also knew that using feature flags would be easier if we did it this way. And then it turns out that academic clubs and sports teams are used by the API, and that we will have to maintain backwards compatibility. And as far as the faculty entity that showed up on the ERD, well, it turns out there's this constraint that I found where a faculty can only be part of one sports team, or be also part of two academic clubs. Well, now I'm going to have to account for that in one table, so I got to figure out what that rail looks like, maybe why those things are there. So these are some different questions that I have, and product weighed in. Product's good to go. They think about these things the same way we do, and they're not expected to develop in this area. Awesome. So already I'm whittling down what is the actual work I'm doing and what is the impact across the org. And as I'm doing this and people look at this doc, they know where I'm going, how I'm getting there, and they can totally pick up on it and help push. So the third version of this, a lot of it's the same. You have the background problem, the terminology, the solution's the same. Now we have the current ERD. And now I'm starting to draw out what it's going to look like when I actually do this. Because we've already started to make some decisions. So now we can say, this is what the eventual system is going to look like. Now, of course, with big projects, this is going much bigger. But I'm just trying to give an idea of what this looks like as someone's working through something. On the engineering side, I found out that the faculty restrictions no longer apply. So that's amazing. It turned out it was a piece of tech debt because of the way the tables were originally organized, and no one ever removed it. So yay, we can blow that away. And I found out that our GraphQL API is only used by mobile, has no public customers, which means that, yeah, we're going to have to wait a while to deprecate the API, but we can eventually deprecate it. So great, we can totally cut that trash out eventually. And so these are very important things to know so that you're planning your feature to pick up all the tech debt or have a plan for the tech debt when you're done. And then we have answer product questions. Now I'm to the point where I know what work I'm going to do. Now, I know you all are reading that work. And you're thinking this talk is about the work. It's not. I mean, it is, but it's not, right? The idea here is that because you know my approach, you know what I'm doing, now I've broken down what does it look like to actually get these tables in? What does this mean for the migration on the API, from going from these old academic clubs and sports teams over to the student groups? When can we drop tables? How will we know? How can we make sure if we mess up that we can fix it and that the downtime is not crippling? Well, so I start putting down some work. And the other thing you notice about this work is that if all of a sudden I'm in a time pinch, I can delegate. At my second job, they changed the name Miki to mean delegate. I consider that a compliment. Okay, then this is where my very last doc here, where you'll notice I've moved things around if you look at the table of contents. I have notes pushed down to the bottom. What happens is I'm working through a doc, I figure out a lot of the basic information that I needed to start the doc. It's getting old to me, or I don't want to scroll past it anymore. I'm just done with it. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to take a notes section, I'm going to push all the historical stuff down to the bottom of the doc so that people don't have to look at it, right? But I still want it there if I'm trying to remember how I got there. Like that product question section is important. I don't want to get to delivery and find out that someone in product says that they're not doing that. I'm like, but look, Susie said that everything was fine. I'm not trying to throw Susie under the bus. I'm just trying to say that decisions were made with certain data, and the data came from certain places, and that's just what it is. You'll also notice in this table of contents that now I have an API flow and a dual write API flow. Let's go take a look at that. So here, mermaid is your friend. The more mermaid type of diagrams you can write, the easier it is to communicate with other engineers and other people just in general, especially for auth flows. These sequence diagrams are amazing for auth flows. So here, someone's confused exactly how we're going to kick out that middle part. How are we going to go from reading academics clubs to reading academic clubs from the new student groups? And so here I say, this is how it works now. And then I'm like, then we're going to leave it how it works now, but we're going to dual write to this other table. Right? Then you would backfill the data that's already in that table. Okay, so now we got a table that's being updated. It's already been backfilled. So now the student group table is full and the memberships are all populated. And then when we switch over to it and we're waiting for deprecation, now the academic club resolver is resolving through the student group context. And we can support that until we can deprecate the last version of mobile, and then boom, it's out. And then I have my known work section. So Kate, it's about time for you to head this way. So the whole idea is that in this process, everyone knows what I'm doing, where I'm going, how I'm getting there. And the funny thing is many of these docs are super small and very basic for work that's only going to last a week or two. And yet the amount of credibility it buys you, because what is everyone looking for in Agile shops? They all want you to estimate. Man, I hate that game. It's like, how good are you at guessing, right? But now if I go to make JIRAs out of this, and I go down to the known work section, it doesn't really feel like guessing the same way anymore. And all of a sudden, you become predictable in the right way for engineers to be predictable. And your design is so open that people can engage with you. So you're showing your organization where you're going, how you're getting there, and they can clearly see it. And that's what vision looks like in engineering. About a year ago, Kate came over. She's my daughter. I'll claim her. She came over, and we would talk about the things that she was going through at work. And one of the things that came up was very clear to me at one point that communication wasn't working the best way that would help her. And so I sat down with her one Saturday morning, and I just wrote up one of these docs for something she was doing. And 2 weeks later, the transformation of how she was talking about work within 2 weeks changed dramatically. And I work with lots of engineers who, once they start picking up this stuff, their careers change dramatically. It just happens. So she's going to come up and talk about her experience at SimpleBet. She's been there almost 2 years, and she started to employ these techniques.
All right, my mom gave me 3 prompts for this section, and I'm going to answer them and possibly add a few notes at the end. Start my time. Okay. Why is documentation frustrating? Documentation can be frustrating because it requires you to slow down before you start taking any actions, and naturally, I just want to start taking action. I don't want to slow down. In reality, documenting enables quick development. While I want to take off running, it's good to know that the faster way is typically to slow down. What happened when my mom showed me how to document, I just started developing a lot faster. I started the documentation for this one PR and estimated it would take me 2 days. I wrote the documentation in 1 hour, and then I thought to myself, you don't have to start the coding tomorrow. You can do this right now. So I sat down and had everything working in 30 minutes. Next morning, I had the PR submitted for review, and the whole thing took me 1 day to complete and merge. The process was super smooth, and for me, this was huge because I was consistently missing the goals I set for myself, and I was running into unexpected walls, no matter how small or big the PR was. So again, documentation can be frustrating because you have to slow down, but it does make the process faster, in my experience. The next prompt my mother gave me was, when has documentation provided me credibility? Being able to reference my documentation allows me to be reliable and give quick responses. Here's a picture of a payload that is somewhat monotonous and time-consuming to get to. I had a PR that I'd been working on and off for a while. It was a regular thing for someone to ask me what the payload for certain messages were, different types of payloads. And to get these payloads, I had to IO inspect and go through a whole series of steps to get that code to be hit. And it was a long process, but lucky for me, when I was scoping out this ticket and writing the documentation, I copied and pasted the payloads into my documentation right off the bat. I knew what everything looked like, so it was easy for me. Like, I got asked for these payloads like 10 times, and each time I could just go copy and paste. And people don't always read your documentation, so it is nice to just be able to like go and grab it and paste it somewhere, like you just wrote it or something. Makes you look really good. But yeah, it provided me with quick responses and accurate responses too. There was, everything was right. Okay, next prompt. How has it paid off? It's paid off big time. At the end of my mother's section, she discussed how, well, actually she didn't discuss this, but you can reduce your workload sometimes if you scope it out correctly. This happened in a major way a few weeks ago. I was given a ticket, and instead of jumping into the parts that I knew, I addressed what I didn't know so I can have my documentation completed before I started. And I pinged a teammate, we hopped on. 5 minutes later, we ended up bringing a product guy in, and then 5 minutes later after that, we dropped the whole ticket, the whole thing. Like, I didn't have to do any of the work because what they wanted me to do, what product wanted was me to connect point A to point B, but we didn't have point A. So instead of starting on point B stuff, I saved myself a lot of time and heartache by just asking the unknowns. Another big payoff was when I was given a ticket that didn't make sense to me at all. Well, actually, it made a little bit of sense. Here's an example of what it looks like. You don't need to read it. At first, read, it did not make sense to me. And on the 20th read, it still did not make complete sense to me. But what I did was I split it up into 2 sections. We have what the system currently looked like. This section discusses what it looks like currently. And then this is what the system is supposed to look like. And then instead of like trying to use my words, I had 1,000 questions. In my head, this is what I felt like the system looked like. So I just drew it out. And then this is what I thought that it was supposed to look like. I didn't need it to be right. I just wanted to show what was going on in my head so it could be corrected. And then I connected with my product guy and compared the diagrams to what the ticket was asking, and if it was an accurate depiction of what the ticket was saying. And that conversation was so simple. These diagrams paid off big time because I was super confused, and I really didn't know how to put it into words. And after I made the diagrams, I felt like I had a better understanding of the system, and also asking my questions was simple because I could just point. I didn't even have to use my words like, what's that? You know, that was easy. So those are my prompts answered. Okay, you can see. Those are my prompts answered. Why is documentation frustrating? Because to speed up, you have to slow down. There's so many Cars references I could have made in this talk. When does it provide credibility? When I reference my documentation, it just makes, well, I think it makes me more credible. And then how has it paid off? By reducing my workload and by providing me clarity. Now, here are a few side notes from me. My documentation is a lot like these slides. They're very simple. You can understand them, but they're not fancy. They're not pretty. They're like something that you will find in my documentation is like this picture right here. If I was on the ElixirConf website and I'd have this picture in my PR, and then I'd have this list of things that I want to do with it. So it's easy to correlate that list with the numbers that are on the page. I want to add a photo icon, number 1. Oh, reference a list. So I think you kind of get the picture here. I have screenshots like this in my documentation, PR reviews, Slack posts. They're clear, quick, they're not fancy, but they get the job done. So I like doing things like that all the time. Another big benefit to my documentation is it provides quick endings to my PRs. Personally, after I complete the implementation of one ticket, I want to run on to the next one. I don't want to spend time writing a thorough PR description or demoing what the system looks or looked like. If I have done a thorough job at documenting, then I can easily copy and paste. I already have a description of the problem, what the system looks like, how it needs to be tested. All I need to do is maybe make a screen recording of what the system currently is like and choose a funny GIF. Then I can move on to my next big thing. And then that leaves me at my ending. Lastly, what I would like to close with, and listen closely because this is good, but I can't really expound on it. So if you get it, you get it. If it's so simple, then the documentation just will be so quick. It's not going to be a long process. All right, and that is the ending. So you guys have a good day.